Is our home now, Pop. My son-in-law said those words to my face on Thanksgiving morning in my own kitchen while I was standing at the stove I'd bought in 2009. Then he walked past me, poured himself coffee from my pot, and sat down at my table like I wasn't even there. I stood holding a wooden spoon, steam rising from the pot, and I made a decision right then. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Before we get into it, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. The sweet potatoes had been on since 7 that morning. My wife Helen used to make them with brown sugar and a little orange zest, and I'd been making them the same way every year since she passed in 2016. 7 years of Thanksgiving mornings alone in this kitchen, keeping her recipe alive, keeping the house going. The house I bought in 1994. The house I'd refinished, repainted, re-roofed with my own hands and my own money. 3 bedrooms, a good yard, a porch that faces west so the evening light comes in golden and long. My daughter Carolyn called me in February of the year before all this started. It was a Sunday I remember because I was watching the game. And when your daughter calls on a Sunday afternoon, you answer it no matter what's on television. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." Her voice had that careful tone, the one she used as a teenager when she'd broken something. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Troy lost his job. The whole division got cut. We're okay for now, but our lease is up in April, and we can't qualify for another place without his income." She paused. "We were thinking, maybe just until he finds something, we could come stay with you. Just a few months." Troy, my son-in-law, former regional sales manager for a logistics company based in Phoenix. Big handshake, bigger opinions. He and Carolyn had been married 6 years. They had a son, my grandson Patrick, who was 9 years old, and the best thing that had happened in my life since Helen died. "Come home," I told her. "Stay as long as you need." They arrived the second week of April with 2 cars loaded full and Patrick running up the front walk to hug me around the waist. Troy shook my hand and said, "Frank, you're a lifesaver. I won't forget this." I believed him. The first 2 months were fine. Troy was applying for jobs. Carolyn was working her remote marketing position. Patrick was enrolled in the school 3 blocks away. We ate dinner together most nights. It almost felt like the house was full again, the way it used to be when Carolyn was growing up. I told myself this was what families were for. Month 3, Troy started making suggestions. "The guest room needs better Wi-Fi," he said. "Your router's outdated. And honestly, Frank, this kitchen layout doesn't make sense. If you move the island, you'd have so much more space." I kept quiet. They were guests. Guests make adjustments. Month 5, he stopped applying for jobs. I know because Carolyn told me, not directly, but in the way she said things. "He's taking a little time to figure out his next move, Dad. He doesn't want to take something beneath him." Month 7, Troy stopped treating my house like somewhere he was visiting and started treating it like somewhere he lived. His tools spread across my garage. His beer filled my refrigerator shelves. He changed the thermostat setting without asking. Twice I came home from my Tuesday morning coffee with my friend Ed to find strangers sitting in my living room, friends of Troy's. I introduced myself as the homeowner and watched their faces go confused, looking between me and him. Month 9, Carolyn's name started disappearing from conversations. It was always we. "Our house needs this." We were thinking about getting a dog. We might repaint the living room. I took Carolyn aside one Saturday. I kept my voice low and even. "Sweetheart, I need to know your timeline. When is Troy expecting to find work?" She looked at the floor. "He's being selective." "You've been here 9 months. I know, Dad. You're not paying rent. You're not contributing to utilities." "I'm not complaining," I told her, and I meant it. "But I need to understand where this is going." She nodded and said she'd talk to him. 2 weeks passed. Nothing changed. The Thanksgiving that broke everything was a year and 8 months after they moved in. My neighbor Ed's wife Janet asked me in early November if I was doing Thanksgiving at my place or if I'd come to theirs. I told her I was doing mine. I had Patrick to think about, and the sweet potato recipe, and tradition meant something to me even when it was hard. I spent 3 days preparing, ordered the turkey fresh from the butcher on 5th Street, the one I'd been going to for 20 years, made pie crusts from scratch the way Helen taught me, set the table with the good dishes we'd gotten as wedding gifts in 1981, white with a thin gold rim, the ones I hand-washed because they couldn't go in the dishwasher. Troy had mentioned to me casually a week before that some of his friends might stop by. How many? I asked. Just a few guys. Jake and his wife, probably. Maybe Darren. I said that was fine as long as there was enough food. I planned for 12. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Not Jake and his wife and maybe Darren. 7 people. Troy met them at the door like he was hosting a party he'd organized himself. Come in, come in. Let me get you a drink. His voice filled the entryway. He was already steering them toward my living room, my couch, my television, before any of them had taken their coats off. I came out of the kitchen with oven mitts still on my hands. Troy, I said, you mentioned 2 or 3 people. He waved a hand without turning around. It's Thanksgiving, Frank. Relax, relax. In my house, on my holiday. With my dishes, I went back to the kitchen. Patrick found me there 20 minutes later, sitting at the island with the oven timer counting down. Grandpa, are you okay? I'm fine, buddy. He looked at me with those serious brown eyes he gets from his mother. He lowered his voice. Dad said this is his house too. He said that when I asked why Grandpa was in the kitchen. I looked at my grandson for a long moment. Then I took his face in both my hands and said, Patrick, do you know whose name is on the deed to this house? Yours? That's right. Don't forget that. He nodded like he was filing it away. I served the food at 4. Carried the turkey out on the platter. Helen and I bought at a craft fair in 1997, hand-painted ceramic with autumn leaves along the rim. Set it at the center of the table. Nobody acknowledged it. One of Troy's friends, the one called Darren, said, Bro, this looks amazing. You really went all out. Troy smiled. You know how it is. Holidays are a big deal here. You, he said you, not we. Not my father-in-law cooked this. Just you. I stood in the doorway of my own dining room holding an empty serving dish, and my jaw was tight enough to ache. Everyone found seats. I noticed what they'd done only after it was done. 12 chairs at my table, and the arrangement left me standing. Not a dramatic thing, no empty chair with my name on it, just the organic result of 7 strangers spreading out, and Troy and Carolyn taking their usual seats, and Patrick sitting next to his dad. No seat for me. I had cooked for 8 hours, and there was no seat left at my own table. I stood there for a moment. Then I started moving toward the chair at the head of the table. My chair. The one I'd sat in for 29 years. Troy saw me coming. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't move to make room. He said it clearly in front of everyone, in a voice that carried, This is our home now, Pop. Maybe let the guests have the good seats. Pop. He'd never called me Pop before in 6 years of marriage. It came out like a demotion. The table went quiet. I could feel Carolyn's eyes on me without looking at her. Patrick had stopped moving his fork. I straightened up. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Excuse me? You heard me? Troy's expression was patient, the way you're patient with someone who's being difficult. His friends were frozen, reading the room. That's my chair, I said. At my table, in my house. Frank, don't make a scene. Carolyn's voice from halfway down the table. Small. Embarrassed. Not for Troy. For me. That was the moment. Not Troy's words. Carolyn's. I set down the serving dish. I took off the oven mitts and folded them neatly over the back of a chair, and I walked through the dining room, through the living room, to my bedroom, where I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed I'd slept in for 29 years. I sat there for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on Helen's nightstand, the one I'd never replaced, even though the second hand stutters a little now. Then I got up and went to my filing cabinet. I have a folder labeled Property. It's got the original deed, the title insurance, the paid-off mortgage certificate from 2007, the property tax receipts going back 15 years. I keep records. I spent 31 years as a property and casualty insurance adjuster. Documentation is a reflex. I carried the folder to the kitchen, set it on the counter, and picked up my phone. I called Ed. He answered on the second ring. I need you to come over, I said. Not as a guest. I need a witness. Ed Marchetti has been my neighbor for 18 years. He's 71, retired electrician, more practical than anyone I know. He was at my door in 4 minutes. I told him quietly what I needed. He didn't ask questions, just nodded. Then I walked back to the dining room. 7 strangers at my table. My son-in-law at the head. My daughter not meeting my eyes. My grandson watching me with a 9-year-old's too careful attention. I stood in the doorway and I spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. I need everyone who doesn't own this property to be out of this house within 30 minutes. I'm the owner of record. This is my home and I'm revoking permission for this gathering. Troy, Carolyn, we'll discuss your arrangements separately. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard inside those walls. Troy laughed. He actually laughed. Come on, Frank, you're embarrassing yourself. Ed stepped up beside me. I heard the door open behind me and felt the cold November air come in. He stood there without saying anything, just stood there, and his presence said everything. The guests started moving. Not all at once, but in that awkward sideways shuffle that happens when people decide they don't want to be part of something. Coats gathered. Phones found. Darren said something like, "Hey man, maybe we should give you guys some space," and Troy said no. Nobody's going anywhere. But Jake was already at the door saying, "Thanks for the food. We'll catch up later," and within 10 minutes, every one of Troy's guests had left. I stood in my living room. Troy was still at the table. Carolyn was next to him now, her hand on his arm. Patrick had disappeared upstairs. "You can't do this," Troy said. "We live here. We have rights." Ed leaned against the door frame. "Son, a guest doesn't have rights. A tenant has rights. Do you have a lease?" "We don't need a lease. We're family." "You need something," Ed said pleasantly. "Because what you have right now is a homeowner who's asked you to leave his property." Troy turned to Carolyn. "Tell him." Carolyn looked at me for the first time since I'd walked away from the table. Her eyes were red at the edges. "Dad, please, it's Thanksgiving. We can talk about this." "We can talk about it in the morning," I said. "Tonight I want my house back. You can stay in your room tonight for Patrick's sake. But tomorrow we're having a different conversation." Troy pushed back from the table. Fine, we'll talk tomorrow." He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. Ed stayed for an hour. We sat on the porch in our coats and he drank one of my beers and I had coffee and neither of us said much. At one point he said, "You know they're going to push back hard." "I know." "Do you have everything documented?" 31 years as an adjuster, Ed. "I have everything," he nodded. "Then get a lawyer before they do." I didn't sleep much that night. Not from regret. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a year and a half, and the quiet sat strange and unfamiliar. The next morning I was up at 6. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, and I opened the folder and I wrote down every number I could account for. Mortgage paid off, so no rent displacement. But utilities 18 months, electric up from $95 to $210 average, gas doubled, water up 60%, groceries I'd been feeding 4 people on a 1-person budget. I'd lent Troy $8,500 in April of the prior year for a car repair that turned into other things. I had the text message where he promised to pay it back. I'd put $3,200 on my card for school supplies, Patrick's fall clothes, a dental bill Carolyn said they couldn't cover that month, tracked and saved. Every receipt photographed and stored in a folder on my phone labeled household. The total came to somewhere between $22,000 and $28,000 depending on how I calculated the utility estimates. Troy came downstairs at 9. He had the expression of a man who'd spent the night rehearsing. He sat across from me. "Look," he said, "last night got out of hand. I get that, but you can't just throw us out. Carolyn is your daughter. Patrick is your grandson. Think about what you're doing." I'm thinking about it very clearly. We've been here a year and a half. That creates legal standing. I looked it up. I looked at him for a moment. "Troy, you want to talk about legal standing with someone who spent 3 decades in insurance litigation?" He didn't have an answer for that. "I have a lawyer," I told him. "I'm meeting with her this week. I want you to find new housing within 60 days. That's generous. I will help Carolyn with a deposit on an apartment if she asks me directly. I will not negotiate this with you." His face moved through several things quickly. "You'd put your own daughter out on the street. She's 34 years old. She has a job. She's not being put out on anything. I'm asking her to live in her own home instead of mine." He left the table. That afternoon I heard them arguing upstairs, voices low and urgent. Carolyn knocked on my door at 5. She sat across from me in the kitchen, and for a while neither of us spoke. Dad, I know Troy has been difficult. Difficult isn't the word I'd use. She folded her hands on the table. He keeps saying this is our home too, and part of me started believing it. That's on me. I know that. I want to be her father. That was the pull of it, the difficulty. She was my daughter, and she was sitting at my table looking like she was 12 years old and had broken something she couldn't fix. Carolyn, I love you. But your husband told me in my own home at a table I've sat at since before you were born that this was his house. And you said nothing. She looked down. I need you to understand that what you said nothing to was the erasure of 29 years of my life in this house. I know. 60 days, I said. I'll call my lawyer Monday. Her name was Patricia Okafor. She'd been recommended by my insurance company's legal contact, someone I'd worked with years before. Sharp, efficient, no patience for wasted time. I met her at her office on Meridian Avenue that Wednesday. I laid out the folder. The deed, the utilities, the loan documentation, the text messages. Patricia reviewed everything with the quiet attention of someone doing math. You have a clean case, she said. They have no tenancy agreement, no documented rent payment, no lease, nothing establishing legal residency. In this state, a non-paying family member who moves in at the owner's invitation is a licensee, not a tenant. The license can be revoked with reasonable notice. What's reasonable notice? Typically 30 days for someone in their situation. You offered 60. That's more than adequate. And the money? The $8,500 is recoverable. The utilities and living expenses are harder. You'd need to demonstrate specific amounts and the understanding they were loans, not gifts. Do you have anything in writing? The text messages. She put down her pen. Mr. Whitfield, she said, this is the most documented case I've seen walk through my door in 6 months. I wasn't surprised. People who spent their careers in documentation do not stop documenting when things get personal. Troy and Carolyn didn't hire a lawyer right away. Troy tried something else first. He called my brother. My brother Dennis lives in Tucson. We talk every few weeks. Troy somehow got his number and called him, telling his version. Something about me having a breakdown, becoming hostile and erratic, threatening to put his family on the street. Dennis called me that Sunday evening. Frank, what's going on out there? He sounded careful. I told him all of it, calmly and in order. Dennis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he called me first. I know he did. He's looking for pressure. Don't give it to him. I don't intend to. But Frank, you're sure about this? Dennis, this is my house. I've been paying for this family for 1.5 years, and my son-in-law told me I was a guest at my own table on Thanksgiving. Dennis didn't say anything for a moment. Then, yeah. Okay, yeah. That was enough. The 60 days pass with the specific tension of a countdown that everyone can hear but nobody says out loud. Carolyn began looking at apartments in the second week. She asked me twice about the deposit offer. I gave her $1,800, transferred directly to her account with a simple note for new housing. With love. I did not give anything to Troy. He didn't ask. They moved out on a Saturday in late January. Carolyn and Patrick in 2 trips in a moving truck. Troy was there, but he didn't speak to me. When they had the last box loaded, he walked past me to the truck, and that was it. Patrick hugged me at the door. Held on for a long time. I'll see you next weekend, I told him. Same as always. He nodded into my shoulder. Grandpa, why did Dad say this was his house? Because he forgot himself for a while. But that's done now. He thought about that. Then he went to the truck. I stood in the doorway after they drove away. The house was mine the way it used to be. Quiet in every room, but the good quiet, not the hollow kind. A month later, Patricia called. Troy had filed a small claims petition, claiming I owed him $4,000 for improvements to the property. He cited replacing a bathroom faucet and some caulking work around the tub, painting a bedroom, and, this was my favorite part, general maintenance contributions. I met with Patricia the next morning. Do you have photos of the property from before they moved in? On my phone. Dated, she smiled. Of course you do. Troy had filed the claim himself, without an attorney. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning at the county courthouse. Patricia and I arrived at 8:45. Troy was already there with a manila folder and the expression of someone who convinced himself he had a winning hand. The magistrate was a man named Judge Hooper, methodical, no expression, reading glasses that he kept taking off and putting back on. Troy presented his case first, spoke for about 5 minutes. Faucet replacement, estimated cost $80 in parts, he'd done the labor himself. Bedroom painting, materials about $60. Caulking, tube of caulk. He had receipts for the materials, no receipts for labor since he was claiming his own time. Then he got to the $4,000 figure and Judge Hooper looked up. Can you explain how you arrived at $4,000 from the items you've described? Troy shifted. Well, my time has value. I'm a skilled professional. Do you have documentation of a prior agreement with the property owner to pay for your labor? We had an understanding. Written, it was verbal. Judge Hooper wrote something down. Then he looked at me. I presented the folder. Photos of the bathroom taken the week before they moved in, showing a different faucet that I had personally replaced 2 months prior. The original faucet that Troy claimed to have replaced was one I'd purchased and installed myself. The bedroom paint was a color Troy had chosen without asking and which I would need to repaint to my original shade. The caulk, I acknowledged freely, was something he had done. I estimated the two cost $7.99 at Home Depot. Patricia submitted the documentation establishing my sole ownership, the absence of any lease or financial agreement, and a letter from my insurance company's records confirming the property had been under my sole coverage for 29 years without any additional occupants listed. The whole thing took 18 minutes. Claim dismissed. The magistrate said it without ceremony. If the plaintiff wishes to pursue a legitimate claim for documented labor costs, he may refile with proper documentation. At this time, no enforceable agreement has been established. Troy's folder sat on the table in front of him. He didn't pick it up right away. In the parking lot afterward, he caught up to me before I reached the car. "This isn't over," he said. "You'll see." "Troy," I said, "I'm 63 years old. I'm retired. I have time, documentation, and a very good attorney. If you'd like to continue this, I'll be here." He didn't say anything else. I heard through Carolyn, who had begun calling me again carefully and briefly, that Troy had found contract work, logistics consulting, reasonably paid, that they were in an apartment in the same school district so Patrick didn't have to change schools, that things between her and Troy were not good but were stable. Patrick came every other weekend. We made pancakes on Saturday mornings and watched whatever game was on in the afternoon. He didn't ask about his father, and I didn't bring it up. He seemed lighter at my house, more himself. One Saturday in March he was doing homework at my kitchen table while I made chili. He looked up from his notebook. "Grandpa, Dad said you were mean for making them leave." I stirred the chili. "What do you think?" He thought about it seriously. "I think Thanksgiving was really awkward." I laughed. "It was, buddy. And I think you should be able to sit at your own table." "Yeah, I think so too." He went back to his homework. Then, he said without looking up, I told Dad that he didn't like it. Patrick is 10 now. Smart kid. Keeps his own counsel. Carolyn came to the house alone in April. She sat at the same kitchen table and wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee, and we talked for the first time in a long time without anything between us. "Dad, I'm sorry." Not a rehearsed apology. The real kind, where the person doesn't make excuses. "I know you are. I kept telling myself we'd be out soon, that he'd find work, and then it became normal. Being there, having you cook, having you pay for things." She looked at her coffee. "I stopped seeing it. I know. The worst part isn't what he said on Thanksgiving." She looked up. "The worst part is that I didn't say anything." I nodded. "I've been thinking about that for months. The moment you walked away from the table and I didn't stand up. I keep going back to it." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I told her what I'd needed to say since November. "Carolyn, you are my daughter and I love you without condition. But there are things that happen that become part of the record. They don't disappear. What I need from you going forward is different than what I needed before any of this." "What do you need?" "Honesty, directness. If something's wrong, you tell me. You don't wait. You don't wait the other person speak for you." She nodded. "I can do that. And I need to know that when you walk into this house, you walk in as my daughter, not as someone who lives here, not as a co-owner, as a guest who is always, always welcome." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "I will. I filed the civil claim for the documented money in May. Patricia had the paperwork ready since February. $18,500 for the loan plus $6,800 in documented utility overages plus $2,100 in documented household expenses. Total $17,400. Troy contested it. His new attorney sent a letter arguing the funds were gifts, not loans. Patricia responded with 11 pages of documentation, text messages, bank statements, the original exchange from April where Troy wrote, "I'll get this back to you within 6 months, promise." Bank statements showing the money transferred from my account to Carolyn's with the note car household loan. A signed acknowledgement I'd asked Troy to write when I gave him the money, which he'd done because at the time he had no leverage to refuse. That document, one handwritten page, said simply, "I acknowledge receiving $8,500 from Frank Whitfield as a personal loan to be repaid in full." It had his signature and the date. The hearing was in June. Same courthouse, different judge. The loan repayment was ordered in full. The utility overages were partially awarded, the judge noting that without an explicit loan agreement, shared household expenses were difficult to characterize as debt, but ordered $420,100 based on documented excess over baseline. The rest, he declined to award. Total judgment, $12,600. Payment plan established. $300 per month. 42 months. Troy's face during the ruling was a specific kind of blank that belongs to people who've lost something they were certain they'd keep. Ed and I sat on my porch that evening. First real warm day of summer. He had a beer. I had iced tea. He said, "You good?" I thought about it. "Yeah. I'm good. You feel like it's over? The legal part. The rest takes longer." He looked at the street. Quiet neighborhood in the early evening. Couple walking a dog. Kid on a bike. Trees doing what trees do in June. "You know what I keep thinking about," Ed said. "What?" "You called me before you even said anything to Troy, when you decided." "I needed a witness." "I know." He smiled at his beer. "But most people, that moment comes and they yell. They cry, they do something. You went and got your folder." I shrugged. I had 31 years of practice. The monthly payments started arriving in July. $300 on the first of the month, transferred directly, no note. I put every payment into a savings account I opened specifically for it. I don't need the money in any urgent sense. My pension from the insurance company is solid. My house is paid off, but that's not why I filed. I filed because Troy needed to understand that what he took was not free, that my house, my table, my chair, my years of hosting and cooking and keeping the lights on had a value, that when someone tells you to be grateful you tolerate them in your own home at your own table, there is a consequence for that, not because you want revenge, because accountability is the only thing that makes anything real. Patrick spent a week with me in August. We drove to the coast, stayed 2 nights in a motel that had a pool, ate seafood on the pier. He slept late, and I made breakfast and didn't wake him. On the last day, driving home, he said, "Grandpa, do you miss Mom and Dad being at your house? I miss your mother. I miss you every time you leave." "What about Dad?" I thought about how to answer that honestly to a 10-year-old. "I miss who I thought your dad was going to be." He considered this. "Then, me too." We drove the rest of the way home listening to the radio. He fell asleep about an hour out, and I drove to the Flat Valley Light with my grandson asleep in the passenger seat, and I thought about Helen, about what she would have made of all of it. I think she would have made of all of it. I think she would have been angrier than I was, honestly. She had very little patience for certain kinds of disrespect. But I also think she would have done exactly what I did, gotten her folder, kept her voice level. Made sure the records show the truth. Some lessons take a long time to land. Carolyn is learning hers. She calls every week now, and the calls are different, more honest, less careful. Troy is paying his $300. Patrick is doing well in school and still makes me draw the play diagrams when we watch football. The sweet potatoes were better last Thanksgiving. I made them alone the way I'd made them the past 7 years and ate them at my table in my chair. Ed and Janet came over. We had a good evening. After they left, I sat on the porch in my coat. November cold, the good kind that makes the stars sharp. I thought about the man who stood in his own dining room a year ago with nowhere to sit, holding an empty platter. He had options he hadn't used yet. That was the difference. Not helplessness, not surrender, just a folder in a filing cabinet and the patience to open it at the right time. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me what time it is where you are. Click the next story on the left. Thank you for listening. I've been thinking about that Thanksgiving table for a long time now. Not with bitterness, more the way you think about a moment that clarified something you've been slowly going blind to. Troy didn't take anything from me that day that I hadn't already been quietly handing over. Every month I said nothing about the thermostat. Every dinner I made for 4 people without a word. Every time I stepped aside when he filled a room with his voice. I was teaching him that this was acceptable. That's the hard part to sit with. Not what he did, what I allowed. There's something that happens when you love someone, or love someone who loves someone, where you keep extending the benefit of the doubt past the point where it makes any sense. I told myself Troy was under pressure. I told myself Carolyn needed stability. I told myself Patrick needed his parents in one place. All of that was true. But I used those true things to avoid a harder truth, which was that nobody in my house was learning anything from my patience. They were just taking advantage of it. When a person acts without accountability, they don't become more grateful over time. They become more entitled. That's not a moral judgment. It's just what happens. Troy didn't start calling my house his home because he was a bad person in some fundamental way. He did it because nothing in 18 months had pushed back. I had been the path of least resistance, and water doesn't think about where it flows. It just goes. The folder in my filing cabinet was the first time I pushed back in a way that had weight. Not anger, not a speech, just documentation. 31 years of professional habit sitting in a drawer waiting for the moment I was ready to use it. What I learned from Frank, which is to say from myself, is that intelligence without action is just worry dressed up as patience. I knew things were wrong for most of those 18 months. I tracked the numbers. I watched the dynamic shift. I understood what was happening. But understanding alone didn't change anything. The only thing that changed anything was deciding, in that quiet bedroom on Thanksgiving evening, that clarity was enough of a reason to act. Carolyn is different now. I want to say that because it matters. She didn't become a different person overnight. But she became honest, and honesty is the raw material that everything else gets built from. She calls every week. She says what she means. She showed up at my kitchen table in April without an agenda, just with the willingness to say she'd failed and to figure out what came next. That took more courage than Troy ever found. Patrick turned 10 this year. He asks good questions and doesn't let the answers slide by. He's going to be fine. Better than fine. The $300 comes in on the first of every month, and I put it in the account I opened for it, and I don't spend it on anything in particular. What it represents is more useful than what it buys. It represents the understanding that actions have weight, that what you take from someone doesn't disappear just because you never wrote it down. I wrote it down. If there's anything worth carrying out of all of this, it's that your home, whoever you are, is not just an address. It's the accumulation of every year you spent building something. And when someone tells you to be grateful they tolerate you in the house you built, they are not having a bad day. They are telling you exactly who they've become. The only question left is what you decide to do with that information. I decided to open the folder.